Hello to the pessimistic, optimistic, and everyone in between. My name is Connor Philippi. Welcome back to the Minnesotan Sports Podcast and the second of two videos I'll be recording today with my friend Jake here. I'm not going to make him go through the whole introduction again, but go back to the other video we just recorded about the Twins off-season, and he can kind of explain, kind of his background in sports, what got him into it, and we did a little bit of an interview before the actual segment about all that. But Jake is a good friend of mine, but the best man at my wedding, and we met a few years ago at an internship in Wilmer, and we've been friends ever since. So he's gracious enough to blabber with me about sports.
Oh, it's always a pleasure, Connor. Always a pleasure.
So we're going to be talking about, usually this happens around mid-season, but because the Vikings had such a late, bye this season, we're going to do our official Vikings State of the Vikings address at the basically 2/3 point of the season. So at the beginning of the season, I thought this was going to be a completely different video than I thought would be happening at the middle of the season. And then that ended up being a whole lot different than what we're talking about right now. Because at the beginning of the season, we looked like trash.
Yep.
Well, the thing is, it was frustrating because we didn't look like trash. We looked like a very talented team that just couldn't win games, which was honestly...
We got in our own way. That
exactly.
was the problem. We had so much promise and so much talent, and then we just got in our own way.
Mm-hmm. And then things looked up. We won multiple games in a row. We had the biggest... The only win by more than a touchdown maybe since the middle of last season.
Yeah.
Against the Packers, and then it all went away. Kirk Cousins tore his Achilles. It was kind of funny because Jake snapped me saying it's over, and I was like maybe 10 minutes behind in the game because I was taping it, watching with my family. And so I texted him back. I was like, yeah, feels good. And then he texted me back, no, the season's over. And I was like, what? And then that play happened as I was reading it. And I was like, okay, this is how things are going to be. Kirk Cousins ends his season on a torn Achilles on the Lambeau Field. It's just the worst way to possibly see that happen. And at the time, we were like, okay, it's over now. I didn't think we were going to win even a third of our games going down the stretch. And then that's when things kind of shifted where Josh Dobbs came in, and it's going to be a whole discussion here about what's going on now with him with this. But the defense took over, and our offensive line actually started playing decent. We kind of fell off the last couple games, and we got back up to that point where we were then 6-4, and then the last two games happened. So that's where we leave it right now, and that's where we'll talk about things. So the first point I have here is Josh Dobbs, just as a whole. He started off so well in those first two games. He looked like the reincarnation of, I don't know, Russell Wilson in his prime years all of a sudden. And I was like, what is going on? Dobbs was okay in Arizona. And then he blew up. He had an incredible game against the Saints. He could have had an even better game if the play calling hadn't, kind of almost made us lose that game. And that's another thing we'll talk about. But then the last two games, Dobbs has just been awful. And it sucks because he had such a good momentum. He had such a great story, and it's still an amazing story. Even the way he's playing now, it's incredible he came in the way he did, and that story that came into it with the game against the Falcons will be remembered for a while. But all of a sudden, his playmaking or his decision-making just fell off the face of the earth. In the last game against the Bears, he threw 4 interceptions. It could have been 8.
Yeah.
That's how bad it was. And our defense almost still got us a chance to win that game. And what do you think about Josh Dobbs right now? I personally think we should play him against the Raiders and give him a chance with JJ before we even start to make any other decisions. But also, Jaren Hall, he got 2 possessions of a sample size. But do you think there's any point in the season where we try to go with Jaren Hall? What do you think about that whole situation?
So I'm going to use an analogy that one of my friends described Josh Dobbs as, and it shows why he's been a career backup. He is a scout team quarterback. I love Josh Dobbs. I love the story, but he is one of those guys that until the whistle blows in practice, he's going to make sure the play gets done, play doesn't stop. And you see these in these interceptions and these intentional grounding penalties. He's not going down, he's not taking the sack, he's just throwing the ball up, and that's on the defense or on one of our receivers to get that ball. And I love the story. The story is amazing. Doesn't even know his teammates' names, comes in, is being told the plays through the headset. Awesome story. Do we think it's something that can be consistent? No. I think we saw that against Chicago. We saw that where the 4 interceptions could be 8, could have been 12. He looked bad, and my time where I knew that this fairy tale was ending was that deep throw to Jordan Addison. Completely, not a soul within 10 yards, and he threw it out of bounds to Jordan Addison. I don't even know what to say on that, but I think we give him one more go. He shows that he can control an offense. It's just finishing the job. Jefferson, we'll see if he can make a difference. I mean, to me, I still think Jefferson and Tyreek are those top 2 receivers in the league. Jefferson looked so good last year with Kirk. We'll see if Dobbs can work with that play style. This week in practice, I say Dobbs and Hall have to both be taking starter reps because if Dobbs shows us another 2 interception, 3 interception half, we got to get Hall in there quickly. And I think KOC is responsible for that to make sure that he is on a short leash.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that it's definitely important to know how Justin Jefferson affects things, because as much as I hate to say it, it's kind of up in the air right now whether or not we'll get JJ for the rest of his career, which I hope we do. But we're seeing a lot of what does this team look like without Kirk? What does this team look like without JJ? And some of it was optimistic, some of it was really scary. And so I think that that's an important factor. You mentioned KOC, we're going to talk about him next. There were a lot of points these last couple of games where I was terrified that I saw some serious glimpses of Mike Zimmer again. That game against the Saints, I was like, this cannot be happening again. Just the most conservative play calling in a game where we were up by multiple touchdowns, and then an inability to close the game out, an inability to do anything in the run game when the run is anticipated. Those are all things we saw from Zimmer, and we saw that those issues with play calling were overshadowed almost by how good the defense played. But these last couple of games, it didn't quite do that. So do you think that Kevin O'Connell can change things around here? Because he's in his second year. The first year, it didn't feel like that happened as often as it did. And maybe the fact of it is he is less likely to take chances if Justin Jefferson isn't in. Maybe he doesn't have trust in Dobbs, because really this isn't happening. This hasn't been happening his entire career. The season and a half I've seen before this really started to go south was really not that bad. He had some questionable decisions, but those were more based off of inexperience. So do you think that what we've been seeing out of the last few weeks from O'Connell is the coach that we are going to get from now on? Or do you think that this is all incidental and that once we have a full team back together again, things will be different?
I'm more trending towards once we have a full team, we're going to see the KOC of past, because one of the selling points for him being our next head coach when we got him from LA was this idea that he was not going to use a traditional playbook. We saw with Cooper Kupp, he was taking deep shots to him. He was letting him run the ball, and he did that with Jefferson too. Just like he tried to not have that traditional play calling. I think one problem that I am seeing a lot more now of, which I never thought I would say this after last year, KOC's trusting in his defense too much. The conservative play calling, I feel like, is more, we don't need to get that first down. Our defense will stop them. They've been stopping them all game. And that came to a head with Chicago on Monday Night Football. We had a 1-point lead. We have 3 minutes left, roughly, and you ran the ball up the middle twice, and then you give a shot to TJ in the flat. to not even get the first down, and then you let Justin Fields look like prime Aaron Rodgers, drive downfield, get that field goal, let them win it in our home stadium on Monday Night Football. That was ridiculous to me.
Mm-hmm.
The defense was on the field almost 75% of that game. You cannot have that much trust in them when they've been working their asses off that entire game. You
Mm-hmm.
knew something had to give, and last year we didn't have much trust in our defense. As you saw, we had to come back from a 33-point deficit at one point, and I think he's trusting too much in the defense where he says, man, I think our boys can go out there and get a stop. Will it change when we get Jefferson back? Will it change when we get a whole team together? I don't know. I think we'll see a different KOC when everything settles in, but he needs to not lean on the defense so much.
I 100% would agree with that. I feel like one of the reasons, honestly, why those first couple weeks of Dobbs worked out as much as they did is because Kevin O'Connell wasn't trusting his defense because he for whatever reason, and they were letting Dobbs take chances simply because he didn't even know what he was doing, really.
Yeah.
And now that you've got a guy who has been struggling making decisions and you don't trust him at all, you're now basically deciding you want to lose games by a little as opposed to giving your team a chance to win. And obviously the downside of taking those chances is we lose by 20.
Yeah.
But what Kevin O'Connell needs to understand is if we lose the game, we lose the game.
Yeah.
If we lose by 3 or lose by 20, we might look like a worse team if we lose by 20. But what really matters is, did you give your team the best chance to win? And he just, the last couple of weeks, simply has not been doing that. And I think that's what he needs to understand. I think, and also let's bring into the next point, the run game. It's kind of a similar thing where we have no run game when it really matters, when we need to run down a game. But for the most part, our run game just has not been good. And the question is, because I personally don't think that even if Dalvin was still in this style of offense, the way our play calling has been, I don't think Cook could have done much in this either. So I think it's less to do with, honestly, Alexander Mattison, who, yes, is fumbling a lot, but no matter what running back has come in here, it's not looked good. So what do you think we need to do to salvage the run game? Do you think it can be salvaged, or do you think this is an offensive line thing?
I don't think it's an O-line thing. I think we're seeing probably the best O-line we've seen in a while. I do think the play calling is struggling. Too many runs up the middle. And we saw this with Cam Akers too before we lost him to Achilles injury. You have a guy like him who, when he was in LA, he was used similar to Cooper Kupp. He'd be out in a slot spot and end up doing an end around and would get 10 yards. I liked what we saw from him. I wish we didn't lose him that early, but Madison, same thing. We're seeing some good games from him. He just can't hold on to the ball, which, unfortunate. He has to work on that in practice. There's not much you can do there. I feel like the play calling is too leaned into the Kirk Cousins. We can trust him to throw a pass because he was very accurate with Jefferson, with Hawkinson, with Osborne, Addison, all this. And now we have a guy who isn't Kirk Cousins by any means. Right. We have Josh Dobbs, who they're not trusting him with his agility and being mobile because he was one of those guys who could scramble out of the pocket and get 10 yards. We only had one rush last week. I think we start to trust in our guys a little bit more to get to that outside. Yeah. We don't send them up the gut, and it's not calling out Reisner, Bradbury, any of those guys. It's lazy play calling. It's consistently up the gut. Doesn't need to be a consistent thing.
I think that I was expecting, and I think this is another one of the things where the first couple games of Dobbs was more consistently good, is I think that I would have expected O'Connell to get more creative. Yeah. Instead, he got less creative. He got more, down to the rules of the playbook and the things that I would have expected him to expand the playbook and change things more than he did. It just feels like he didn't. He tried to find a new way to do the things that they've already been doing as opposed to trying to invent some new creative plays. And hello, what's going on? You can watch. I'll find a way to cut it right there. So let's transition now here to Brian Flores, who is really the bright point of everything that's been happening the last few weeks. Brian Flores has completely transformed this defense. It's a defense that's made up of a lot of people we saw last season, with a defense that was one of the worst, probably the worst in the entire league last year. And so we've seen certain situations where Flores has been a little less, willing to shy away from the rush. And I think that's really the only negative thing we've seen. But for the most part, his aggressiveness has really transformed things, and it's made things easier on these cornerbacks, I feel like. So what do you think Brian Flores has done to change the way that this defense is being looked at in the eyes of the league?
I mean, it's one word, aggression. It's these guys who can lower their shoulder, get a good hit. You had Harrison Smith, known as the Hitman, who didn't rush at all last year, didn't get any blitzes. Mm-hmm. He was one of the most feared safeties when he was coming around that corner, and they dropped him back for every single play. That was annoying. Now you're seeing him blitzing. You're seeing him dropping back. You're seeing him as a constant threat. It's the ability to have 11 guys on that side of the ball, and you don't know which one of them are coming at that QB or which one of them are dropping back. We might see our D lineman drop back. Danielle Hunter might be back there to cover the pass, but it's that aggression knowing he could send 11 at that quarterback if he really wanted to, or he could send 0.
Yeah.
It's also trusting in those guys to be playmakers, and we've seen some big guys step up. We've seen Danielle obviously looking amazing. Hope he can stick around.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe not, but I love seeing what he's doing. Caleb Evans, not many people are talking about him. He has been amazing at that cornerback position. He's a hard hitter. He's making sure that if the ball's getting caught in his area, that receiver's not holding on to it. And he's hitting hard. Harrison Smith, I still say Harrison Smith, top 3 safety all time. Mm-hmm. Nobody wants to talk about that, but we'll have that discussion another time.
Yeah.
Bynum has been a playmaker this year. Mm-hmm. He has been an absolute threat at that safety position, but he's also blitzing. He's also getting those tackles in the backfield. I think it's amazing. Yeah. I think Flores did something that Donatel didn't, and he's trusting his guys to play their position and step up and play something a little bit different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that what's amazing about this is that there's so many guys that are going to get better.
Yeah.
And like Bynum is his 3rd season, right?
3rd.
So he's going to get better. There's so many young guys. I mean, even with how good Evans has been, I've seen a lot of things where I'm like, he could have, covered this better. And it's just, there's a lot of ways this team can improve, which is exciting on defense. And then what really does it for me is it really shows you how horrible Donatel did when you see Daniil's numbers last season.
Yeah.
And then you see him play again this season, and everyone's like, oh, wait a second, I forgot Danielle Hunter is a top 5 lineman in the league, or a rusher in the league, because Donatel, what was his, I don't even remember, did he have even 3 sacks last season?
It was, the problem I had is that he didn't send him, he had the most feared rushing duo at the preseason with Hunter and Zadarius Smith. Everyone was talking about that's going to be a threat. And then nothing happened. And you saw nothing from it. Mm-hmm. And, damn, I still wish we had Zadarius with this defense. Yeah. That would be insane. But you're seeing Danielle Hunter become the Danielle Hunter we all saw. Yeah. We saw him rise up with Zimmer, which Zimmer wasn't a great head coach, great defensive coach. Mm-hmm. But I'm glad we're seeing the Hunter of old. And, obviously, we want him back. We want him to be a cornerstone of this Vikings defense. But we'll have to see where that goes.
Yeah, and obviously Hunter's amazing, but this is the style of defense where obviously him leaving, I'm not saying that doesn't take us a step down, but it still makes this thing possible with pretty much anyone. Yeah. Let's just finish things off here, and this is the real tough question. We'll look at some of the standings. Right now we've got So the Cowboys are in, and everyone up is in. Falcons and Saints are going to battle it out for the division. But other than that, it's really just those bottom two spots. Right now, the Vikings and Seahawks are both 6-6 in those two spots. The Packers, Rams, and Saints are in at 5-6. Do you think the Vikings, with the schedule we have remaining, we've got the Raiders, Bengals, Lions twice, and Packers. I really think that Vikings-Packers game might end up coming down to which of us two gets that spot. But obviously, it depends on if our offense continues to be as stagnant as it's been the last couple of weeks. Who knows how many of these games we're actually going to win? What's your final record prediction for the Vikings? Do you think we're going to make the playoffs?
Now that's a tough question, and you prefaced that perfectly. Are we going to make the playoffs? I don't think so. I think unless we can see something amazing in Dobbs and Jefferson connection or Hall and Jefferson's connection, I think we're going to miss out. And would I be upset? Probably not. You saw how many things went wrong for us this year. We lost Kirk. We lost Jefferson. We lost Akers. We lost Darisaw for a couple of games. We've been losing so many key parts where if Kirk was at the helm, I'd say this would be different. I'd say without a doubt we'd make this playoffs. I don't know if I trust in Dobbs enough or Hall enough to lead us to the promised land. And if they prove me wrong, I'll be as happy as I can be. But I don't see any way for us to be a playoff team if we're going to show what we showed against the Bears, because we have a very easy schedule on paper, but is it going to be easy when we see the Raiders, who they've got Devontae Adams? That's always a tough game going against him. The Bengals, you got Joe Mixon, you've got Jamar Chase, obviously without Burrow. That's a whole different story. But then you get the Lions. The Lions are the most random team, I think. They're either going to show you a 21-0 score after the first half, or they're going to fold. And we saw that on Thanksgiving against the Packers. And the Packers, man, I hate seeing them rising up like this. We're seeing Jordan Love actually having some good games. Aaron Jones being out is going to be a huge question mark, though. Can Watson be a playmaker? There's so many questions around it. If I'm going off my gut feeling, no, we don't make the playoffs. I do think it will come down to that New Year's Eve game. And as much as I want to see us leave with a W, I don't think we're going to get it done.
Yeah, I think we're going to split the next two, and then we're going to lose to the Packers. We're going to lose to the Lions, and then I think the last week against the Lions won't matter. They'll probably have their backups in, but I think we'll end up going 8-9. I think that the Packers will go 9-8. I think it'll be the Packers and the Seahawks in. The Seahawks are not looking great, but I can't see the Rams in. It maybe the Saints or the Falcons would sneak in, but I think it'll end up being the Packers and Seahawks.
I mean, I'm not going to count those Seahawks out. I mean, the defense still has a lot of question marks there, but you saw what they did up against Dallas's defense.
Yeah.
They kept it close. DK Metcalf, even though I went up against him in fantasy this week, he looked like prime Randy Moss out there with that stat line. I think they're one that's going to sneak in, but I think they are a dark horse to make a good run at it.
Yeah, I think out of the 5 teams that are in that race, if there's one of those teams that I think Philadelphia, San Francisco, or Detroit is afraid of, it's probably the Seahawks, because they have enough playmakers to make that happen. I also don't think the Vikings will be in, so we'll have to see. I think it's possible. It's not like we're saying no way.
And we're at this point where we know if they prove us wrong, cool, that's great.
Yeah.
We still get to support them in the playoffs, and obviously it'll depend on how we come out of this bye week. Are we going to keep running with Dobbs? Is Hall going to be our guy? What are we going to see from this Vikings offense with Jefferson? And if they prove us wrong, so happy to see it. If they don't make the playoffs, am I going to be upset? Probably not.
Yeah. I think we'll have a good idea of what the Vikings will probably end up doing in the offseason based off of these games we see, based off of how this team could be transformed by Jefferson being back in or not. If we miss the playoffs, we're in kind of like a middle position for the draft. Michael Penix, who knows?
Michael Penix, you saw a couple of those Heisman favorites starting to drop. There's word that like Bo Nix might be around there.
Yeah.
I don't know if we go for the quarterback. I don't know if we get help on the defensive side. We'll see in the end. But do we bring Kirk back? What happens next? So many question marks, but I'm excited to see all of it.
Yeah, and obviously a lot of those things will be a question for another day in a few months from now. But yeah, I mean, I think we said all that needs to be said about this Vikings team. A lot up in the air, but at least some excitement for what we're going to get to watch and what we'll know about this team by the end of the season. But yeah, that does it for us. Thanks so much for watching this one. Put in the comments what you think. Do you think the Vikings will be in the playoffs or not? Definitely a chance, but it's shaky right now. But thanks again so much for watching. Thanks to Jake for joining me, and I'll see you on the flip side.